Enemy mech destroyed. Primary objective successful. Proceed to dust-off zone for extraction. Sensors indicate friendly dropship has entered atmosphere. ETA dropship 1 minute. Shutdown sequence initiated.
The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners should consult with a professional before making any decisions based on the information presented.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. We are broadcasting from 300 feet down in an abandoned nuclear missile silo somewhere deep in the post-apocalyptic wastelands of the Dakota Territories. And as always, I'm joined by the paranormal crime fighting duo Daisy and the Sundance Kid, working security tonight. And, you know, it was just this morning. We were in the war wagon on our way to Bartertown for supplies. They were Daisy and the Sundance Kid sitting shotgun, and we had an official sighting of the Slender Man. He was radioactive, he was glowing, and looking to drop the keto diet. And tonight's story, tonight's main topic, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off last week. It has been a nonstop, in my world anyway, a nonstop information flow in the old event stream on the Great Space Roller Coaster, and that information flow has to do with 3I Atlas. That's right, that's the interesting name given to the incoming alien craft I discussed last week. That's why this is going to be a two-part show. And there's a reason why it's two-part, and a lot of that reason has to do with cyber prophecy, has to do with the WebBot and what the WebBot spit out this week. It was chugging and groaning and spitting out some smoke. A couple of springs probably popped out of it, but it had some interesting things to relay. And, Cliff I, the inventor of the WebBot, has now moved into a compound for security reasons, and there are some good reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with violent stalkers, believe it or not. So, Cliff actually has a compound now, which is away from the coast. And so the WebBot is safe from any incoming tsunami type of activity, and it's been picking up hordes of conversation levels on very heightened emotional levels dealing with 3I Atlas. And the WebBot is kind of painting all of this in a different light, a different perspective, and that ties in with what I was going to also discuss last week, which was reality hacks. How do you hack the Matrix? Can the Matrix be hacked? I believe it can indeed, and we're going to be talking about that tonight because that ties into all of this. It's amazing how these so-called theoretical puzzle pieces, when they're examined in totality, begin to present a whole that is really beginning to make a lot of sense. The math is beginning to add up, and we're beginning to see things in a whole new light, aided with WebBot and its cyber predictions for our immediate future in the event stream. So we're going to be talking about psionics. We're going to be talking about how it's very quite possible that the human species has with its interaction with the universal reality matrix, sort of manifested the event that's about to take place with this craft and the changes that it may portend for humanity. And all of this really ties in well with our paranormal in the news this week, which really came to us in the form of Knapp and Corbell and Ross Coulthard, George Knapp, and Jeremy Corbell again have released some very interesting information. The guys over at the UAP Registry, which I'll mention them again, they're doing good work with the FOIA request. They're actually somehow financially able to employ lawyers or getting lawyers to work pro bono, etc., to sue different departments for documents, and they're getting some interesting little golden nuggets. One of those golden nuggets is an apparent UAP interaction that was completely recorded by the military. This occurred in Avon Park, Florida, so somewhere in the middle part of Florida. There were numerous eyewitnesses. Apparently this base in the middle part of Florida there is known for its drone technology. It has drone wings there, and pilots and all of that kind of stuff. And these soldiers were out in the field deploying drone technology when they noticed a quite large cigar-shaped golden cylinder sitting in the sky. And it sat there for long enough. Apparently they were able to record it and all of that. And then it just blinked out of existence. And there again, I think, is an indication about what we're going to be talking about tonight, this idea that the reality matrix is malleable, that there are ways of hacking that matrix that some intelligent life forms may have discovered and probably, without a doubt, have discovered. And, the WebBot is predicting a time when we have a kind of a singularity of understanding with this alien consciousness, and that'll be part of our cyber prophecy. But paranormal in the news. So Coulthard had Michael Herrera on a deep dive interview, and it's really important to do these deep dive interviews because you can extract detail out of an eyewitness in a way that you can't do otherwise. And Herrera makes it clear, and I have to remind everybody that the Congress is having a major UAP hearing in September. They are calling forward firsthand eyewitnesses. These are the people in the programs. These are the people that have stood next to the craft, etc. Aided by the whistleblower David Grush, who is working for various congressmen to round up these witnesses and get them to testify. And all of that is sort of the backdrop for this past week and what's going on. Herrera is one of those firsthand witnesses, and his testimony is that he was a Marine. He was selected for security duty on a landing zone somewhere in Indonesia. They were out of our base in the Philippines. This was a normal, everyday kind of operation. And their duty was to get to the landing zone prior to the helicopter landing so that they could secure the area so this thing could drop off supplies to, who knows, a rebel group of some kind. And Indonesia has tons of, it's like one of the major terrorist, police hotspots around the world. So having security in a landing zone where you're dropping off supplies maybe to a rebel group of some kind is completely feasible. His story in my mind, adds up. And so he goes to the location with the group of soldiers that were meant to be the security detail for this landing zone, and off in the distance, a few hundred meters, he describes it as being, as they could see something in the trees, through the trees of the jungle, that looked like, to them at the time, a building or they couldn't, it was a structure of some kind. That's all they could identify. They thought, well, possible threat. We have to go check it out. The leader of the group of soldiers ordered them to go check it out. And as they got closer to the object, they entered into a clearing and got the shock of their life, because right before them was a craft that was hexagonal in shape. It was rotating slowly, and it was hovering off the ground without any sound whatsoever. Beneath the craft was a flat platform, not something ever reported before by a UFO eyewitness. Not that I can recall, in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases. This is unique in ufology, what they eyewitnessed. As they came into the clearing, immediately on all sides of them, they are basically jumped by special operators wearing black camouflage with no insignia, black ball caps with no insignia, and clearly having American accents. So these were American related. They disarmed the Marines, they took their IDs, and they bioprinted each one of them. They threatened that they would kill them if they ever spoke about what they had witnessed. And out of the corner of his eye, Michael Herrera sees 4 trucks enter the scene. He describes them as being Ford F-350-like trucks, but completely blacked out with no insignia on them. And being towed behind them are these container, like shipping containers that are about half that size, but look like a shipping container. And on top of the shipping containers are HVAC systems. So there's something living inside, right? And these trucks pull up and drop off these shipping containers with HVAC systems onto a flat platform that then begins to hover up into the bottom of the craft with no visible signs of being connected to it whatsoever. The special operators back up and disappear into the jungle, leaving the Marines completely bewildered, and the craft actually was described by Herrera as elevating a certain amount into air with no sound whatsoever and shooting off at phenomenal speeds, thousands of miles per hour instantaneously. Few interesting notes about all of his testimony. A, he claims that this thing had grooves, it had rivets, it had panels, it had all the indications of something manufactured by humans. Let that sink in. Although it seemed advanced, the fabric of the craft appeared to kind of fluctuate between a deep gray and a black. So black, he said you could almost shine a laser into it maybe, and it wouldn't even reflect. It was that black. And that there were 5 lights on the craft, apparently on different corners of the craft. So that's interesting, and that this thing took off at such a phenomenal speed that he doubted anybody could survive inside. That kind of a G-force. So it must be talking about something that can create its own gravity bubble, which is something Bob Lazar and others have talked about within back-engineered alien craft. He did have a camera in his pocket and was able to snap apparent photographs of this craft before these guys in black came out of the jungle, and he was able to hide it so that they didn't get the camera. And this is where things get interesting. So they pick up their weapons. The guys had taken all of their clips and dropped them on the ground and kicked them off in the bushes. They collected all their clips, got all their stuff together, and hightailed it back to their camp. And they didn't say a word to anybody. This was 5 Marines. They thought that they were just going to be laughed and joked at. They didn't say anything to the commanding officer or anything, and it psychologically did a lot of damage to all of them. Herrera has the camera in his possession, though. He's like, I got some evidence. I have proof here. He leaves it locked in his locker on the ship. He comes back to find that his locker doesn't apparently have anything missing from it. Nothing. The lock is still on it. All the items are still there, but the camera has been taken out, placed on his bunk, and the battery and the memory card removed from it. So the insinuation is that whoever was controlling these guys on the ground had to be U.S. military. Period. Now comes in the testimony of Jake Barber in all of this, because Jake Barber is the other major whistleblower who picked up and had video proof of picking up an egg-shaped UFO and flying it off with his military helicopter to an undisclosed location. And Jake Barber claims that in his service, he learned that there were so-called psionic assets being controlled and operated by and employed by intelligence services here in the United States, and many of these psionic assets are foreign in nature, and that these people are all people of a heightened spiritual nature, that they have heightened psychic abilities, which are now referred to widely in government circles as psionic abilities. And it is these people who have a ability to interact with UFO craft in such a way that they are useful to the United States military. Now, Barber believes that because he picked up a number of these shipping containers that had HVAC units on top of them, air conditioning units on top of them, and he was told that inside are psionic assets, that there are psychic individuals inside these little trailers that they keep in a sort of comfortable and meditative-like state to be able to do what it is they do, and they keep them in these things so that they don't even see the craft that they're being transported in. That's fascinating. Little glimpses here and there of what's going on. But what's fascinating is that this all ties into what the Webbot was getting at today and this week, in that reality doesn't work the way most humans think that it works. Reality is an unfolding event stream that apparently can be hacked. In other words, there are secrets being employed by various groups around the world who are, I believe, in war with one another. I call it the Great and Secret War in my book, American Sorcerer. And we're going to talk about the secrets that these groups possess. We're going to talk about how at the heart of all of those secrets is this greatest of all secrets, that lying within the human body human physiology is the ability for us to actually manifest reality, manifest events within our own event stream in such a way that we can literally control our own destiny. Think about that. Because all of this ties into this idea that the WebBot has, that we collectively as a species have manifested this event about to take place within our event stream. In other words, it's making it clear that the observer of the materium is in some way connected to and partaking in that materium in such a way that we are actually manifesting events without even knowing it. That ties into a lot of the secrets that these groups around the world have and their desire to use these secrets in order to control the collective subconscious. A lot of people refer to that as performing or achieving the great work. You might hear that once in a while. A lot of the words that I'll be using to describe these secrets and techniques of how to hack the reality matrix and what they teach in their groups, and how this and why this is important to this upcoming event. I'll use some archaic terms, but that's okay, because in my 30 years of investigating occult groups and their techniques and their secrets, it's become clear that at the heart of all of them is a singular mechanism. And that singular mechanism was even written about in a widely published and publicly accepted book called The Secret, which is this idea that you can sort of magnetize your living essence in such a way that you can harmonize with the universe and create events to take place in your life which are beneficial to you, right? Well, what if I told you guys that in the 1400s, a couple of occultists got their hands on a system that today is referred to as Enochian magic, but at its heart is an alphabet, a geometrically constructed alphabet that appears to have the ability for those that know how to use it. And let me clearly state that a lot of groups that use it are using it in an experimental basis with different kinds of results. But those that have utilized it and published about it have every indication that what they have tapped into is a type of source code. Imagine way back in the 1400s, a couple of occultists, one of them, a Dr. John Dee, who was a famous historical figure, and the very first true spy in the English court, and he even signed his documentation to the Queen with the code 007. Believe it or not, the original James Bond was heavily involved in all of this, and he had a psychic assistant named Edward Kelly, and it is told by them in their writings that they achieved this communication with non-human intelligences that relayed this information to them. Now there's every indication, and we're going to get into this more deeply after our break, but there's every indication that certain occult groups have been able to utilize this alphabet in such a way that they have hacked into the reality matrix. In other words, there's two ways of achieving this mechanistic end of bending or altering reality to human will. And one of those apparently is sort of like, it's a hack, a shortcut. But with any shortcut, there are perhaps untold dangers, and we're going to talk about that too. And is it possible, as I ask in my book, American Sorcerer, is it possible to utilize this very mechanism in order to protect the human species from what might be a hostile, non-human intelligence? We'll get back to that and Three-Eye Atlas after our break.
I'm Sarah, and this is my story.
I'm Ellen, and this is my story.
One night, I was at a bar. I was having fun with my friends.
I
had one too many drinks.
I
got behind the wheel to go home.
I got a cab to go home.
All of a sudden, from out of nowhere, a squirrel ran across the road.
It
happened so quickly, I barely had time to react.
The cabbie barely had time to react.
I swerved.
The cab swerved.
I can't believe it. I hit a guy.
I cannot believe it. The cabbie just missed a guy.
I wish I took a cab.
Thank goodness I took a cab.
You have the choice to save a life. Don't drive buzzed. It's a decision you'll never regret. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the Department of Transportation and the Ad Council.
Shadows creep, monsters leave. In the woods, strange voices. Shadows creep in the woods, monsters leave. In the woods, bright noises. Mystical. Airway mystical. Mystical. UFO. Alien overlord.
From ancient times to modern days, legends of creatures in sudden disarray. Hear them speak through frequencies. Alien connections.
Break it out, truth untold. Tune it in, cosmic mystery. Dark woods, where legends breathe. Paranormal whispers, can you believe? Bigfoot strikes through the veils. Darkman howls in the midnight tale. From the static, revelations pour. Portals open, dimensions roar. Echoes of the truth, no disguise. Cryptic shadows creeping near. Through the static, voices clear. Dark woods where legends breed. Paranormal whispers. Can you believe? It's the Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio. Wednesday nights, enjoy the show. It's how we spend our Wednesday nights. Yay! It's crank the dial and dim the show. It's how we spend our Wednesday nights.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. I'm your host, Jack Carey, your tour guide to the Twilight Zone. And as always, we are sponsored by paranormal-experts.com. If you have a case out there that you need somebody to talk to about the weirdness going on and maybe find some answers, you can always book an hour with a paranormal expert at paranormal-experts.com and by jackcareyart.com. So most of you don't know, but I'm an artist. Check out my site, jackcareyart.com. There are, if you hit the shop now, there's dozens and dozens of different kinds of products available with my paintings on them. And I have paintings on display in an art gallery here in town. So I don't know if anybody's in the Dakota territories, but check that out. So, but tonight, we're talking about reality hacks. This idea, the concept that there's a way of hacking into the event stream, a way of following certain rules, certain laws, which seem to govern this ability to manifest our will into reality. Think about that. That's the stuff of magic, right? But magic is an archaic term. Nobody uses that anymore unless you're in one of these archaic mystery schools that has groups of people that still use the old lingo and the old way of doing things. But at its heart lies a body of techniques that trick and or allow the human body to bypass what scientists call the liminal threshold. So there's a natural barrier that's put up in the human consciousness, in the human mind, and that natural barrier keeps us safe. It keeps us from automatically just manifesting anything that pops into our head. Think how chaotic a reality that would be. Nothing could be accomplished. Nothing could be achieved. So there's this natural barrier called the liminal threshold. Even remote viewers are taught this. This is a secret, which is no longer a secret. It parades around in broad daylight. It hides in plain sight as a secret, but it's no longer a secret. It's simply difficult to achieve, and there are various techniques through which to achieve it. And the idea is to bypass the liminal threshold. Why would that be the case? Because it is apparent, and this is after many, many laboratory experiments done worldwide with psychic people. It's apparent that within each individual human being, there is a tiny little piece, a tiny little spark of universal consciousness. In other words, think of it like the idea that the creator of this material then chose to divide itself up into countless living organisms within that materium in order to seek out what the webbot refers to as novelty. So imagine you're an all-knowing, all-seeing deity, right? You create this universe and you're bored. What is it that you seek out? What is the experiment that you run? You seek out waveforms of chaos that might achieve you that surprise that you didn't expect. That is the seeking out of novelty. Well, within every human being, apparently, there is this little spark that allows us this mechanism to actually control reality around us. These things have been hidden from the public for eons of time by people who have evil intentions through the use of this mechanism. The mechanism is neither good nor bad. It's neither evil nor holy. It is simply exists within our materium, and it exists in such a way that human biology can take advantage of it. That's the great secret. And how do you achieve bypassing or crossing the liminal threshold? How do you manifest an event in your event stream? Well, there are two ways, as they are taught in ancient mystery schools. And as Crowley once put it, you can inflame yourself with prayer. In other words, you can work yourself up into an absolute frenzied state to where there is a seizing of all conscious thought. It is in that state that you can have communication to your subconscious mind through the liminal threshold. The other way, as it is described, is becoming still like a glassy lake. Completely, utterly, totally still. This would include any and all forms of yoga and mental meditation. They all are designed in order to achieve a singular end. That singular end is communication across the liminal threshold to the subconscious mind. Why would you want to achieve that? Because the subconscious mind has the ability to bend unfolding probability to will. I'll say that again. The subconscious mind has the ability to bend unfolding probability to will. Now, there's been a lot of historic groups, and there's some in power even today, that utilize things that are called predictive programming. In an end, all of that is an attempt to control the mental thoughts and processes of the population as a total in order to control the event stream. That's all they're trying to do. They are utilizing things like Hollywood and imagery and the music industry, etc., to control consciousness within a very narrow band so that they can actually predict and control events in the event stream, and they call that controlling the collective subconscious or achieving the great work. The entire Illuminati is based around that idea. The Natanier, or navigator, as they refer to them in the global cabal, which actually utilizes all of these secrets, is the person that chooses the kind of imagery that gets propagated worldwide. Now, it's fascinating because all of this ties into all kinds of ancient occult history and intrigue. There have been a number of historical figures, and I'll put this disclaimer out there. It's not my intention to insult any belief system or religion whatsoever. In fact, all the religions seem to encompass within them the same secret. It's just been obscured by the people that are in power of those religions because they want to have that ability and not the masses. So how do these groups go about it? Well, there was a man named Donald Michael Craig who once came up with an equation that has since been proven true, and that equation is a way of calculating how much or how many participants of a given psychic ability it takes in order to achieve a kind of change in reality. In other words, the more participants targeting an unfolding probability, the higher it is that that probability will unfold to their will. That's why you want to control millions and millions of people's minds with the imagery that you're feeding them, because they will it will sink down over time past the collective subconscious liminal threshold into humanity's consciousness, and it will become manifest in our collective event stream. Now, this same mechanism can be achieved on an individual basis. That's the great secret. And that's the secret they wrote in the book called The Secret. You know, I mentioned that there were several individuals throughout history who have achieved this ability, and most of them are figures around which religions were later formed because of their ability to use this mechanism. Let's take, for example, and not to offend anybody, but let's take, for example, the historical figure of Jesus. Well, let's look at the early origins, right? Who comes to the birth of Jesus that was underneath a sacred star alignment? It was the Magi of Persia. Don't let them tell you it was the three kings or the three wise men. It doesn't say that. It says it was the Magi of Persia who came. The Magi of Persia is where the word magic comes from. It was the Magi of Persia who actually held a star prophecy that their king would be born under a star alignment. It wasn't the Hebrew people who had that prophecy at all. In other words, this group of magicians from Persia followed a sacred star alignment that they were aware of, and underneath it was born to them their king, right? There's a reason why at the age of 13, Jesus disappears for a 20-year period. Check it out. Gone. Not a word. Disappears from the age of 13 to the age of 33. Guess how long it takes a Magi of Persia to train fully? You guessed it, 20 years. What a coincidence, right? And all of a sudden he shows back up, and this is something Crowley points out, after having spent a prolonged amount of time in the desert doing what? Meditating. Very specific meditational practices which are taught in these groups. And then all of a sudden this individual has the ability to almost manipulate reality at will. That's a heightened psionic ability. It is quite possible that there are people born into the human species who have an ability to bypass the liminal threshold much, much more easily than other people. It's around these people that you begin to see actual miracles performed. And there's various individuals all through history this has occurred to. In fact, Buddha was seen a number of times walking up to a river, raging river. He would dematerialize on one side of the river and rematerialize on the other side. There's historical accounts of that. So this isn't limited to any one religious figure. What ends up happening is those who witness those events end up deifying that individual because of their inability to achieve the same mechanism. They think, oh my God, I must be a god. No, all humans have these abilities. Some of them just have them to a heightened degree. There's a reason why we have pro athletes too. Doesn't mean you don't play tennis on the weekend, you know? So here we are with this craft on its way, and there's every indication coming out of the WebBot that we as a species interacting with the universal event stream have somehow manifested this into our reality. What sort of changes is that craft, is that life form going to bring with it? Because as Cliff High put it this week, examining information out of the WebBot, there is absolutely no indication that this thing is a natural stellar body. No indication. You have to stretch the laws of all kinds of astrophysics to explain how and why this thing is on the trajectory and speed it's on out of absolutely nowhere. They're estimating, and if their estimations are correct, that this craft has been traveling for 8,000 years past the Oort cloud on a direct path to the Earth. And if that's the case, and if there are life forms on board, those life forms will be aware of the event stream. They will be aware of the ontological nature of the universe in ways that we can't even imagine. They will have knowledge about how all of this works, how the actual universe, fabric of the universe may have been created. They may be able to verify our ideas of a holographic universe, of a program being run with all of us inside of it. They may be able to, in fact, explain to us in such a way the real, true nature of the universe that we come to a point that the WebBot describes as a singularity of understanding. And all of this is tied to time. All of this is tied to our understanding of Cartesian time, which is really sort of a prison constructed for the human species. Time is not what we think it is. And the WebBot is saying that there is this big change coming in our understanding of time, and it coincides with the arrival of this craft. Might we then surmise that it's because information is able to be extracted out of this life form? That's one of the questions that Cliff High put to the WebBot this week. By which means will the powers that be extract information from this life form in such a way that it creates the singularity? And there again, it came up with all kinds of indications about time. So this mechanism, this reality hack, this way of actually controlling your reality, your event stream, and your life, it has to follow certain laws. And the biggest law that governs this entire mechanism is what these groups refer to as lust of result. A lot of people out there can do what the book The Secret says, and they can sort of harmonize themselves with the universe and with reality, and they can manifest a new Mercedes-Benz in their driveway, right? And a lot of people can't. And the difference between the ones that can and the ones that can't is this lust of result. Think about it this way. This mechanism works like electricity. It follows a path of least resistance. Whenever you begin to consciously lust after a result of some kind, you are bypassing the effect altogether. You are grounding that electricity so that it cannot flow. Imagine being able to live an existence in a sort of meditative state where you go about your daily processes, these techniques of achieving, bypassing the liminal threshold without ever having a lust of result for the end result of what you're doing. Because it's those people that are the true magicians of our reality. It's those people who can act in a ritualized fashion without a lust of result, who achieve the ability to bend reality to will. I should do a TED Talk. And you won't hear any of this on any other radio show or podcast in the world, because this is specialized knowledge and information that came to me by way of actual groups out there in the world practicing these techniques. It's the whole reason I wrote the book I wrote, because I realized that what they were guarding, this occult secret that all these groups were guarding, was a secret that could be utilized as the absolute ultimate weapon by humanity in order to win its freedom from what appears to be a predatory, non-human intelligence. I'll say that again. I wrote the book American Sorcerer, detailing how and why all of these techniques work so that people could begin to utilize them. People in the human species collectively, so that we could begin to target paranormal phenomenon and alien phenomenon in such a way that we can bend reality and change the outcome of what might be a very dark future for our species. And what's even more is I believe that these secrets were left to us by none other than the Anunnaki. And it was the Anunnaki who biologically changed our species to be able to have this mechanism. It was because Enki and Nenkarsag, his wife, and Enki was one of the two Anunnaki princes, but Nenkarsag was a genetic scientist. And Nenkarsag altered human biology, the human genome. She took out the 22nd chromosome. And when she did, that brought all hell down upon Enki and her and their group of followers. But what it did was it allowed humans psychic ability. And they did it knowing that over time, it could very well win us our freedom. That's interesting, right? Because there's every indication that Enki and Nenkarsag went down with the ship. Every indication that they and their followers were pro-human at a time when the rest of the High Council that were governing the Anunnaki wanted a total obliteration of humanity off the planet. And instead, they gave them the biological keys to their freedom. They paid the ultimate price for that. They were cast down on the earth for the rest of their days, forever marooned on a planet in a never-ending sea of darkness. Imagine that you were marooned on a desert island somewhere without any sort of technology, no medical supplies, no food. What would you do? What could you do? Because that's the scenario that were left to the rebel Anunnaki when they began to teach us these very secrets. And then they went around and they built monuments out of pure stone that we can't even duplicate to this day. Then within those monuments, they hid, mathematically encoded within them, the exact secret I'm talking to you right now about. They slowly died off one by one, but not before they formed the world's great mystery schools to encapsulate these secrets and to carry them forward for a time such as this. For a time when humanity needs to awaken, needs to begin to utilize these abilities and these secrets to ensure a future of freedom for our species. And that's my show for tonight, guys. You'll have to join us next week, Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Central. And come by paraintelagency.com. We also have a live feed to that show and other great Dragus productions. Come to paranormal-experts.com if you need to talk to a paranormal expert. And if you are looking to transform your space into art, well, help support the show by buying something off of the art shop. There's 40 products on there, all kinds of cool stuff. You can even get shower curtains. So I'll see you guys next week.